at Diana's death. We have all been trying in our different ways to cope. It is not easy to express a sense of loss, since the initial shock is often succeeded by a mixture of other feelings: disbelief, incomprehension, anger, and concern for those who remain. We have all felt those emotions in these last few days. So what I say to you now, as your queen and as a grandmother, I say from my heart. First, I want to pay tribute to Diana myself. She was an exceptional and gifted human being. In good times and bad, she never lost her capacity to smile and laugh, nor to inspire others with her warmth and kindness. I admired and respected her for her energy and commitment to others, and especially for her devotion to her two boys. This week at Balmoral, we have all been trying to help William and Harry come to terms with the devastating loss that they and the rest of us have suffered. No one who knew Diana will ever forget her. Millions of others who never met her, but felt they knew her, will remember her. I, for one, believe there are lessons to be drawn from her life and from the extraordinary and moving reaction to her death. I share in your determination to cherish her memory. This is also an opportunity for me, on behalf of my family, and especially Prince Charles and William and Harry, to thank all of you who have brought flowers, sent messages, and paid your respects in so many ways to a remarkable person. These acts of kindness have been a huge source of help and comfort. Our thoughts are also with Diana's family and the families of those who died with her. I know that they too have drawn strength from what has happened since last weekend, as they seek to heal their sorrow and then to face the future without a loved one. I hope that tomorrow we can all, wherever we are, join in expressing our grief at Diana's loss and gratitude for her all too short life. It is a chance to show to the whole world the British nation united in grief and respect. May those who died rest in peace, and may we, each and every one of us, thank God for someone who made many, many people happy.
We welcome our international viewers.
Having heard the extraordinary before she died, he hasn't revealed them, but he did have this discussion the day before yesterday with Lady Sarah McCorquodale, the sister of Princess Diana. We don't know what those words may have been, or even if they were existed.
I cannot help you here. Can you, Andrew Morton? Well, we said it wouldn't be. I think it may have been the Speaker of the House of Commons, Ms. Booth.
That was Betty Boothroyd.
Betty Boothroyd.
It's rather difficult on this monitor.
Yes. Well, also we're not accustomed to seeing her
she was actually in the same class at school as my father.
Pavarotti, who was invited to come and sing and said he was too bereft to come and sing, and then said he would come anyway. Another of those people in the show business world with whom Diana had become familiar and friendly.
Parliament is not in session, but in our country, the Senate and House passed a resolution of condolences for Princess Diana.
In the case of Pavarotti, here is a relationship that began when he performed at a charity concert in Cardiff, in Wales, for her, at her request. And then she supported his charity to build a music center for children in Bosnia. We all know in the United States, because of the argument about the U.S. position on landmines, that this young, dynamic princess had an enormous effect on government policies in terms of getting them to try to sign the Universal Declaration against landmines. That's Patty Ashdown, who's the Liberal Democratic Party leader. All of the political parties here will be represented today. We expect that Baroness Thatcher will be here and former Prime Minister Edward Heath.
Peter, when you talk about landmines, in the procession of people representing Princess Diana's charities, especially the 6 major charities in which she was involved, children's charities and AIDS trusts and leprosy missions and the English ballet and so forth, and there are, I understand, 2 victims of landmines who are also part of that procession.
I rather wish we knew precisely where this gun carriage was at the moment, because
we're right in front of Hyde Park at Marble Gate. It's right in front of me now, New York.
Thank you, Aaron Brown, very much. I can hear him in my corner. So we're leaving Hyde Park now, or on the verge of leaving Hyde Park, through a set of quite beautiful gates, the most modern gates in Hyde Park, called Queen's Gate, designed in the 90s in honor of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, who is the oldest living member of the royal family, and for many years, certainly with the older generation, has been an immensely popular figure. And it will then go south for just a minute or two under what is called Constitution Arch. And the Queen leaves the north gate of Buckingham Palace to drive down the Mall, or perhaps up Constitution Hill, not exactly certain. I'll tell you in a second which route she's going to take with the Duke of Edinburgh, to reach Westminster Abbey. Nothing is very far apart here, but we're looking at a procession where a horse carriage being drawn has already taken about 1 hour and 47 minutes. And is just getting out of Hyde Park and towards Constitution Arch.
There is Elton John on the camera with his partner, David Furnish. The last time he saw Princess Diana was at the funeral service of Gianni Versace, his very close friend. And you can see he told us in an interview the other day, Peter, that she comforted him, that they had had a tiff. They'd had a silly tiff over Gianni Versace for a particular reason I won't go into right now, but they made up there. She comforted him. He said that this is going to be one of the probably the most daunting experience of his life, to sing today and play the piano in Westminster Abbey. But she kept her control with him, and he said he will do it for her. He has rewritten the lyrics of Candle in the Wind, which was originally written by Bernie Taupin and Elton John in memory of Marilyn Monroe. Now it's going to begin Goodbye English Rose, although, Peter, there was even some controversy over that it may be Goodbye British Rose, because it's more than just England, Scotland, Wales.
Now, I'm going to speculate here a little bit, because we're watching the British Broadcasting Corporation's pool pictures. But what you saw leaving Buckingham Palace was not, I think, the Queen, but in fact was Prince Philip, and that the Queen and Prince Philip may be going separately to Westminster Abbey, and that small group of people there arriving on the Mall, I think, Andrew Morton, in the neighborhood of Clarence House and St. James's Palace, is a representative group of people who will join the procession and be able to signify to the world all of the various constituencies which felt they got so much hope from Diana: the AIDS community, the crippled community, the landmine community, a homeless community.
Absolutely, and in fact, there was one charity, Aspire, which is for people with artificial limbs. They were going to send their officials, but there was a protest from within, and it's all people in wheelchairs now who are going along. And this, again, takes away from any kind of semblance of military ceremonial with the gun carriage. This is really back to what Diana would have wanted, the people that she cared for, that she wanted, people who are, in a way, disenfranchised from mainstream life.
Andrew, she even went to places that no one would think of going. She went to every hospital for the criminally insane, didn't she? I understand. And she watched operations. She watched open heart surgery. She went to places that were you know, not the common places that one would go in order to do good works.
She went, for example, you're quite right, Barbara, she went to the Bullring, which is a place quite near here where all the homeless doss out. And there was a potential security risk, but she was prepared to do that. And it's because it comes from the heart. She saw herself as an outsider inside the royal family, and she naturally gravitates to the outsiders in our own community. And I think this is one of the most significant aspects of her life, and one of the most significant aspects of those people who came to pay homage to her at Kensington Palace. It wasn't the great and the good, it was ordinary people who don't necessarily have a voice either in the mass media or in normal institutions.
Of all the people we've spoken to and we've spoken to so many people since she was killed, one who impressed me above others was Baroness Margaret Jay, who we knew in the United States when she was at one point the wife of the British ambassador, but she became the first chairman of the AIDS Trust in Britain at a time when so many people in the world were terrified of AIDS. And she was telling us on the air the other night that we have to think back to how frightened we were that AIDS was communicable in a variety of ways, which we've subsequently learned to be nonsensical. But that when Diana reached out to touch an AIDS patient here in Britain for the first time, it was practically revolutionary.
It was a baby. Didn't she reach out for a baby?
I was there. It was at Middlesex Hospital in 1987. It was a very moving moment. She just simply shook somebody's hands who had AIDS. It was something that the palace themselves were very nervous about her doing. They didn't want her to get into something which was then totally associated with the homosexual community, and they felt that it was inappropriate for her. She defied them, and it was one of the events in her life which set her in motion towards actually finding herself as an individual. It's an interesting psychological point as well.
Is it true, Andrew, as I've heard, that there was a serious debate in the palace establishment as to whether she would touch somebody on that occasion?
Oh, yes, indeed. I mean, they were talking about whether she should wear gloves or whether she shouldn't wear gloves. The whole atmosphere at that time was very hostile to Diana doing it, and she was very courageous to do that.
When you go to Kensington Palace and you see flowers, many of them have letters and signs saying, "This is from gay people. Thank you, Princess Diana."
Now of Buckingham Palace, and we'll turn now southeast, if geography serves me correctly, and go down to Constitution Hill. Here is Tony Blair and Mrs. Blair. He has played a very significant role in the country this week in a variety of ways. He was first the one who went out and referred to Diana at the beginning of the week as the People's Princess, making it clear in a great many minds here that the people could rally around her and should rally around her. In some respects, it could be argued he contributed to the division that was so clear this week between the people and the royal family. But on a couple of occasions, subsequently, he has been the first person to get out and defend the royal family for staying in seclusion at Balmoral Castle in Scotland, keeping the boys in seclusion, supporting the notion of the Queen speaking to the people. Perhaps, this is speculation, informed speculation perhaps, having something to say about what the Queen said to the nation yesterday. But he is certainly the face of what is called New Labour in this country, very often compared to President Clinton. Been to Washington several times now to talk to the president, and political campaigns in Britain now very much more American than they have been in the past.
The Queen discussed her speech, actually, with the Prime Minister. There's Henry Kissinger. He is here with his wife. Princess Diana was very, very fond of him. They had a kind of, they used to gossip her. He described her as having a wicked sense of humor. He presented an award to her when she was in America last year, when she was at a charity for cerebral palsy, and they felt close to each other.
Richard Attenborough, the great actor who taught Diana how important it was to be a public speaker, and who writes in today's Times a very, very glowing article about their relationship. Andrew?
Well, more than that, he was the one who really encouraged her to become involved in the landmines campaign. Really, he saw her quite a lot at Kensington Palace, and he was the one who actually made a film about landmines, which finally changed her mind that it was something that she must do. And it gave her this real new vitality and sense of direction. She owed a lot to him during her life. And
gave him a sense of new vitality,
yes,
too.
I think so.
Yeah.
Peter, getting back to the Prime Minister, I spoke to one of his... I'll pause now and I'll come back and tell you this later.
Her Majesty, I think that's Prince Edward on her left. And I'm not sure if Andrew's there as well, but Her Majesty walking out through the front courtyard of Buckingham Palace. We'll try to tell you all who is there. Everybody will be here to the best of our knowledge.
The Queen is 71, Duke of Edinburgh is 76. There was some suggestion that in 2002, when she celebrates her 50th year of reigning here, that she would begin to turn some of her official duties over to Prince Charles.
We'll have to have a closer look to see, but the people who are expected are Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, who is one of the members of the royal family who works terribly hard and doesn't get as much credit as some others think she should.
Her son, Peter Phillips, has been very close to the two young princes. He's been with them all this weekend. He's 19 years old. He accompanied them on the plane. He was with them yesterday at Kensington Palace. Princess Anne's son is probably their closest relative near their age.
But the royal family has made it very clear that on this occasion they do not wish to be the focus of attention. You will notice, if you stay with us, that when the service begins in Westminster Abbey, there will be no pictures of the royal family inside the Abbey.
Or the Spencer family.
A reminder of how, to what length some of the tabloid newspapers here will go. The Royal National Institute for the Deaf made it very clear the day before yesterday that they would not provide lip readers to the tabloid press so that they could understand what the royal family was saying to themselves. Cynthia McFadden?
Happening apparently here at Buckingham Palace is the royal family has come out of the palace gates and is standing on the side where the cortege is momentarily to pass. It's our understanding that they are going to watch the cortege pass and then get into the cars and go to Westminster. As the royal family walked out of the gates, I don't know if you could hear it, I know you could see it, but there was applause throughout the crowd. The crowd has grown exponentially in the last hour. There is no room for movement here now. The people simply packed one upon the other. And the royal family is simply standing outside the gates, waiting for the coffin of Diana to be rolled by.
In fairness to Her Majesty the Queen, it is the Queen who invented what is called the walkabout, at which Diana became so famous, and other members of the royal family have tried with, in some cases, success and without success in others. But Her Majesty, who this week, that's Princess Margaret on her right, the Queen's sister, her own tragic figure for many years, who was, and behind her, Viscount Linley, or is that Lord Snowdon? That's David Viscount Linley behind her, who's the son of Princess Margaret. Princess Margaret was married to Lord Snowdon, a world-famous photographer, among other things, and David Viscount Linley, her son, who's 12th in order of succession to the throne, among other things, an accomplished furniture maker who not long ago had a show in the United States. And I do think that is Anne, the Princess Royal, just to the left of the Queen.
Also divorced and remarried, as is Princess Margaret, who you mentioned her rather tragic life. She was in love in the 50s with Group Captain Peter Townsend. Many of us remember this, and that affair was broken up because he had been divorced.
It was 1992 in which Her Majesty the Queen referred to it as her horrible year, annus horribilis. In Latin, she said at the time of her annual address, but that was the year in which the young members of the royal family began to fall apart left right and center. And for those members of the older generation who have gotten out of their beds around the world today, certainly around the United States, there is already an ensconced sense of sadness that, I think that's Mrs. Shan Kidd.
That's Frances Shan Kidd.
Frances Shan Kidd, who is Diana's
It's her mother.
Mother.
and would have been grandmother to the future king. A very sad figure in Diana's life, walked out on Diana and her father when Diana was very young. I think it is in your book,
Yes,
Mr.
indeed.
Morton, in which Diana hears her mother's footsteps going down the gravel pathway for the last time.
Yes, this was at Park House, where they lived next door to Sandringham when Diana was just 6 years old. And it's one of her first memories, is that her mother leaving, walking down out into her car and out of her life, what she thought of was forever. Mrs. Shan Kidd always resented the idea that she was the bolter in the family. She always envisaged having due access to the children. This was denied in an extraordinarily bitter court case, where her own mother, Lady Fermoy, actually testified against her. Such was the depth of bitterness in her family. And that legacy obviously affected not just Diana, but all the rest of the children, Charles, Jane and Sarah.
This has been a banner week for psychiatric examination, both here and at home, because the royal family and the Spencer family have had such troubles, and certainly such public troubles, that the difficulties which the children have suffered, I speak here particularly of Diana and Charles, has not come as any great surprise to people. Another example of how this is being shared around the world by television, that's the Sky Dome in Toronto, the great baseball stadium in Toronto, with its open and closed roof, and it's 5 o'clock, 5:15 in the morning there, and people in that former Dominion still, certainly member of the Commonwealth, former member of the British Empire, getting up to watch this and participate in what has been, let's be fair, an international soap opera for many years. And Times Square in Hong Kong, again, where it is later, people watching this as well, and all across the United States. And I'm mindful of the fact, of course, that this is Saturday morning, and that even at this early hour, or perhaps at this early hour only in some parts of America, children are watching the television set. What you are, of course, watching is the funeral for a young woman, only 36, who was, for people of your age and people of all ages, very much a fairy princess. And she died in a car accident a week ago in Paris with a friend. And though I doubt if you have all watched as much news television as we have this week, those of you who are young, we have watched her life story played out on television this week, and now that is her coffin, buried in the flag, which is actually the monarch's flag, or the Queen's flag in this case, being moved very slowly, accompanied by soldiers, through the streets of London, the capital city of Britain, to the most famous church in all of the British, and certainly one of the most famous churches in all the world, Westminster Abbey, where there will be a very unusual ceremony to celebrate her departure. And that Westminster Abbey, we think one of the people about to arrive is Mrs. Clinton, who has come here to represent the United States, also come to represent the first family of the United States. The president intended to get up early and watch television, still on vacation. Barbara pointed out earlier that Mrs. Clinton and Diana were not particularly close friends, but very engaged they became, Barbara, on a couple of recent trips that Diana paid to Washington.
Yes, and I think that there was a sort of simpatico, because Mrs. Clinton has also had her own problems and her own travail. Peter, you know, one of the things that people feel, and you look at the family, and you see now the Queen and Princess Margaret, is that finally, in the last few weeks, Princess Diana was happy. Everybody keeps talking about that. And when you go and you see the floral bouquets, as we have, there are many of them that say Diana and Dodi are together at last, together in heaven. There doesn't seem to be any resentment that you know, that she died in this speeding car, but rather that at last she found happiness. This was the first relationship she'd had, really since her marriage, that she could be public about. Whether she was going to marry him, whether she wasn't going to marry him, sort of depends on who you talk to. Her closest friends say no, he hadn't proposed. She would never have done anything without talking to her son.
Right in front of Buckingham Palace, the Queen bows her head. And I want to bring back in again Sarah Bradford. Sarah, you've one of the Queen's biographers. Try to help us understand what you think Her Majesty is going through this week.
Well, I think immense sadness. I think regret at what has happened in the past. I think tremendous concern for William and Harry, who are, after all, the future of the monarchy, and who have been through the most difficult time over the past years, seeing their parents publicly disagreeing, having bitter fights, and finally divorcing. And now, just when things were perhaps getting more normal, this terrible thing happens for them. And so the Queen, as the head of the family, bears the major responsibility for them. And I think as she saw Diana's coffin pass, all these things went through her mind, many regrets for the past. And as she said, there was Diana, a warm, affectionate, smiling, exceptional person.
Do you believe that the Queen will also feel a sense of guilt at the manner in which her own son has been raised and the cloistered way in which the crown has existed for so long, and especially now that she sees the public response to the public nature of Diana?
Well, I think that in every family, when things like that go wrong, the parents do, or indeed should, question what part they've had to play in it. And when these first things became public, the divorces, the Queen turned to one of her closest friends and said, "What did we do wrong?" So she's certainly not above thinking that way. And of course, I'm afraid that there has been some responsibility there in the lack of communication between the different generations, which Diana was hoping to bridge when she married Prince Charles.
We will have lots of time as the day continues to talk about the future of the royal family, but you hear the first skirl of the pipes now. As pipers join this funeral procession, let us listen. Many people in the world who think it is not a sympathetic sound, but every day of her life, Her Majesty the Queen is awakened when she's at Buckingham Palace by a piper underneath her bedroom window in the West Garden. Anthony Holden, I don't want to detract from the sense of occasion at all. I don't think any of us do. But I have been struck this week, perhaps by the good taste of all of you who've done commentary in this country, but the reluctance or perhaps decision not to discuss what might call the sort of more reckless or darker side of Diana. I've heard people refer to her in the last several days as now Saint Diana. Is it your impression that this is how she will now remain, or will you in Britain now discuss her in a fuller way when she's buried?
Peter, I think it's become clear this week that Diana was loved as much for her faults and imperfections as for her evident strengths and qualities. I think the reason so many people have fellow feeling is that she didn't hide it when she had a lapse of self-confidence. Her gaffes were all too public. It's what made her so human. And I think you were talking a minute ago about whether the Queen was feeling guilty about the way she brought up her son. I think the Queen's feeling anything like that today. It might well be regret at the rather brutal way the royal family treated Diana just a year ago last week, the week before she died, when they stripped her of her rank of Royal Highness. They formally expelled her from the ranks of the family, and they deleted her name from the prayers said for the royal family in churches throughout Christendom. Diana was very hurt. It was part of the divorce settlement, but many people at the time said that the royal family had gone too far, and that certainly has been on the lips of many people this week.
Thank you, Tony.
It was always...
Sorry, I have to cut you off there for just a moment, just so I
Not
can
at all.
perhaps help to identify for our younger people Prince Charles coming out. You're looking at the Victoria Monument just outside Buckingham Palace, and this is the beginning of the Mall. The hearse, rather the gun carriage, has just moved in front of Buckingham Palace and is now going north along the Mall, past St. James's Palace. And there waiting for her, Prince Charles. To his left, as you can see, Prince William, and to Prince Charles's right, Prince Harry, the two people she loved most in the world, her sons, who, because they are princes in the House of Windsor, must, even if they did not want to, must participate in the very public farewell to their mother.
Peter, on the wreaths, the very first wreath that is on the top of her coffin, the card says, "Mummy," put there by her two boys.
There's been a great deal of discussion this week about whether young Prince William, particularly, who is 15 and something of an idol with teenagers here, will walk behind his mother's coffin, whether her former husband, Prince Charles, will walk, whether Harry will. And earlier in the week, when there was such tension here, such distance between the royal family and the general public, it was thought that it might even be risky for Prince Charles to walk, lest he be booed. He is widely seen here as having treated her coldly in marriage. I think everybody acknowledges that marriages take two, but certainly as this relationship has been portrayed in your book, Mr. Morton, but on a more daily basis in the tabloid press, she at this week is certainly seen to be victim as much as anything.
Absolutely. And at the same time, I think there's a growing mood that Prince Charles himself is a victim of his own background, and that the fact that this is contributing to this change in mood from one of anger to one of reconciliation. The fact that Prince Charles now needs support and sympathy from people, but whatever his faults in the past, as much as Diana does and Diana's family.
You know, there has been no mention at all of Camilla Parker Bowles, and this now puts her in a terribly difficult position, and Charles, because if there is considered a villain, perhaps it is she. She is the one who, it seems, broke up the marriage, although intimates have said that she wasn't the cause, but she was the consequence. And now I think, and I don't know what you feel, Andrew, that it would be extremely difficult for him to continue that relationship. What does he do? Just as he needs the support most of this woman who's his best friend, he can't be seen publicly with her anymore. It's a very untenable position.
Let me first explain to some of our younger viewers who Camilla Parker Bowles is. She's a longtime friend of Prince Charles for many, many years. And when Princess Diana's marriage to Prince Charles was coming apart, Princess Diana gave a very famous interview to the British Broadcasting Corporation here, in which she said there was a third woman in her marriage from the very beginning, and that was Prince Charles' friend, Lady Camilla Bowles, who was in fact married to a friend of Prince Charles. When the marriage broke up, Prince Charles, who acknowledged that he'd had a relationship during his marriage with Camilla Bowles, has certainly been comforted by her and been a long-time friend. She has not been seen in public. She was going to be seen in public this week had Diana not died. She has never met the boys, but I think, as you point out, Barbara, is out of the picture significantly for the moment. We'll come back to that if we may, Andrew.
Indeed.
She has acted with great sensitivity, though, certainly in the last week. And by the way, Peter, that famous interview, which you've talked about, which was done by the BBC, and it was an excellent and very revealing interview. I learned yesterday that it had all been rehearsed and that the questions had all been planned in advance, so that Princess Diana did indeed know everything she was going to say.
And there is your answer. Prince Charles and his two sons.
This is the moment that people have been, if not looking forward to, but looking forward to with some dread in their hearts, really. The fact that seeing this young boy, Prince William, the man who will carry the burdens of monarchy into the 21st century, following his mother. People knew of the bond between William and Diana. They'd seen the way that he was comforting her in her difficult times.
It's...
And I think these are the poignant scenes which will now resound down the decades of history.
This is the Mall, which leads from Buckingham Palace up to Trafalgar Square. This procession will not go all the way up the Mall. But you know, Andrew, I don't think that people really should be surprised. Aside from the fact that Prince William is sometimes described as his mother's closest confidant. This is what royal children are obliged to do. They are obliged to live in the public eye from the time they're very young. I keep thinking of young John Kennedy at his father's funeral. Prince Charles and Princess Anne from a very young age, certainly not with any of the intensity that has been forced on the royal family today, but were expected to be there for public occasions, happy and sad.
You're absolutely right, Peter. In fact, in the old days, there was no such thing as a private life for a monarch. The whole idea of the Privy Councillor, which is a great office of state, was because the individual had access to the king's privy. So the sense that the royal family live their lives out in public, share their emotions in public, and hide their emotions is one of the reasons why that we see this dichotomy, this difference between the royal family and their reaction to Diana's death and the rest of the country. The fact that they've got to shield themselves from so much public grief, an expression of public grief.
Yesterday, to see Prince William and Prince Harry, the way they handled themselves, even smiling and reaching out with such enormous dignity. He's a very popular young prince. You mentioned, Peter, how popular he is with young people, but he's greatly loved, and if anything will keep the monarchy in this country going, it is the affection for Prince William and the hope that, you know, one day he will be king.
And now you see what, of course, we should describe as Diana's procession. Both during her marriage and after her marriage, though after her marriage she gave up a great many of the charities that a member of the royal family is obliged to participate in. But she gave up that, but stayed concentrated with a handful, and many of them are represented today, and they give you a clue to her character. The Arts Council. One time Diana was called the rock and roll princess, but she has extended her interest to art and fashion, as we all know, on a universal basis. The British Deaf Association, 10 members in the Abbey today, 5 in the procession are represented. The British Lung Foundation and the British Red Cross and the British Sports Association for the Disabled, and a summer music festival at Chester in the county of Cheshire, and the Child Accident Prevention Trust, and the City Ballet, and the College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, and the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Glasgow, the Douglas Bader Foundation. Douglas Bader, a very famous World War II pilot who lost his legs and went on to become every bit as famous and mobile as anybody else on his artificial legs.
And
The hat makes it difficult, but I think on the left that is Lady Sarah McCorquodale, if I'm not, we may well make mistakes here, but on the right.
On the right, I think it's Sarah. On the left, it's Jane.
On the right, Lady Sarah McCorquodale, Diana's eldest sister. She's 42, a lady in waiting to her sister. On the left,
Is Frances Shan Kidd.
Ian Francis Shan Kidd, Diana's mother. And on the left, Lady Jane Fellows, who's 40, Diana's older sister, married to Sir Robert Fellows, who is the Queen's private secretary.
And I noticed that Diana's mother, Frances Shan Kidd, has a very glorious cross on her. And she recently converted to Roman Catholicism.
And has spent her last years in really somewhat secluded. She wrote a letter to the press, she wrote a letter, a handwritten letter, in which she said how much she loved her daughter and thanked God for giving her the daughter and for now taking Princess Diana back to him.
Mrs. Shan Kidd now lives on a rather remote island off the west coast of Scotland, and she came down to this today, slightly, she said, reluctantly, to leave a party in the local Catholic parish church this evening, where the parish priest tells us she is now very much involved. It is said that Diana and she were in reasonably close contact in recent years. Diana has never been to see her mother on this remote island, and Andrew, I think it would be pushing it to say they had a close relationship with her.
They had a very up and down relationships. Often Diana would be spending more time comforting her than vice versa. And I remember when Diana was on the cusp of leaving public life in 1993, before she made her famous time and space speech, her mother was on the phone with her various problems. And I think we're now seeing...
Who is that between... No, that's the Earl. That's Earl Spencer.
On the right is Prince Charles. In the centre is Prince Harry. On the left is Earl Spencer, Charles Spencer, Diana's brother. And the far left is William.
Earl Spencer, where you at home may be fairly familiar, and then Prince Philip, the Queen's husband, on the extreme right there. Earl Spencer, who now lives in South Africa, is the one who earlier this week in his first public comments referred to the editors of the British tabloid press primarily as having blood on their hands and having contributed to the death of his sister in that car accident in Paris. The investigation in Paris it goes on with relentless intensity, and a great many people, including, that's the Queen Mother, that's the 97 years old Queen Mother who lives at Clarence House there on the Mall, or on the Mall. They've just, on the Royal Mall has just passed her house. It was from her home that Diana left to go to be married 16 years ago. She is the most extraordinarily enduring member of the royal family, often described as the most popular member of the royal family, certainly for that generation. Slightly seen as a genteel, doddering aunt. Is that a little unkind, Andrew?
I think that certainly as far as Diana was concerned, she never particularly got on very well with the Queen Mother, because the Queen Mother was a great friend of Lady Ruth Fermoy, her grandmother, who was so much against Diana's mother. And she always used to say that Clarence House was the font of all criticism of Diana inside the royal family. I think the Queen Mother does come from a different age. It does come from an Edwardian age where you never complained, you never explained, and you just got on with it.
Have other relationships, and you never, ever, ever contemplated divorce.
Never. No, not at all. And the fact that all the Queen's children have divorced.
Well, except for the youngest son.
Well, he's not yet married.
He's not yet married.
Prince Edward is not yet married, although he's taking his time about it. He's been romancing a young lady called Sophie Rhys-Jones for the last 4 years.
She's an executive, I think, at a public relations firm, and she's here today with him, I think. Yeah. It must take enormous stamina to be seen with a member of the young royals today over any lengthy period of time, given the attention we in the press have given this family. But the Queen Mother, for her generation, in some respects, had something of the same public demeanor as Diana. It was during the war when she and her husband, King George VI, refused to move out of Buckingham Palace when Britain was under siege by German bombers. Buckingham Palace was bombed during the war, and when the East End of London was so terribly bombed, she and her husband would walk among the people. And so she, this Scottish member of the Scottish nobility, endeared herself to a generation in much the same way that Diana has endeared herself to a younger generation.
Yes, I think that's a very good point, because when she first came into the royal family, she was seen as an outsider. It was one of the first occasions that a member of the royal family had married a commoner, albeit a well-born commoner, and she was called Cookie by the late Duchess of Windsor, because she was seen to be rather lowly born. And yet it's the Queen Mother who, in a way, reinvented the royal family, just as Diana in the 80s reinvented the royal family. The Queen Mother made the royal family far more accessible than it had been, certainly during the Edwardian and very much so during the Victorian period.
I want to do a quick canvass here, if I may. I'd like to ask, first of all, Tony Holan, and then Sarah Bradford, and then you, Andrew Morton, to give us just a very, very quick thumbnail sketch of how you think Prince Charles will now be portrayed, given the way he has performed historically, but also in the last couple of days. Tony Holden, may I start with you as we watch Prince Charles follow his ex-wife's casket?
Prince Charles's popularity was at a pretty low ebb before any of this happened. I think there's a degree of sympathy to him, of course, as the father of these two poor boys without a mother, and there's hope that he can somehow shed the coldness of his upbringing and turn much more into a tactile, warm father than perhaps he's been to them so far. He's only spent 30 days with them in the last 12 months. It's very interesting to me watching these pictures, the positioning, the way that Earl Spencer, Diana's brother's in the middle there, and Charles is marginalized like his father. I think that's as it should be symbolically.
He is the
William's the only
ex-husband
hope
in
for
this
the
case.
future. William's the only hope for the monarchy's future, and Charles's only hope of survival, really, as a public figure now is as William's father.
Well, I did anticipate from you, Tony Holden, a quite severe observation. Sarah Bradford, do you feel the same way?
No, I don't entirely feel the same way. I think it's early days to see how the public are going to view Prince Charles after all this has gone on. How far they will blame him for the unhappiness that Diana suffered, or how far they will feel sympathy for him as the lone parent of these two young boys. And certainly the images over the past few days have been very sympathetic of Prince Charles hand in public with his sons. This is hitherto not been a royal characteristic. And so I think that we shouldn't make too much of a snap judgment on this.
Andrew Morton, from you, a sort of brief analysis of Prince Charles' future.
I think Prince Charles's future is very uncertain. His popularity was very low anyway. There was still endless discussion about his relationship with his friend Camilla Parker Bowles. The death of the Princess of Wales has cast a further shadow over that popularity. Yes, he'll become king, but it will be very much a holding operation until Prince William. He is the future of the royal family.
Barbara, when you and I were here, I know exactly what we're doing here in terms of... Hang on just a second. Let's go to the front of Westminster Abbey. I believe that may well be the Queen or the Queen Mother, if we could go to the front door of Westminster Abbey. Well, we can't tell, but whoever it was got applause, or perhaps the applause was merely for the royal standard on top of one of the royal family's many Rolls Royces as it arrives at the west door of Westminster Abbey. We get a better sense when they go in. But as they come here through Horse Guards Parade, they've now turned off the Mall, and they're coming through what is called Horse Guards Parade on their way to Whitehall itself. This is also familiar to many Americans. This is the scene of Whitehall Palace. This is where Henry VII in the 1600s held these great jousts and tournaments, but it is here on the Queen's birthday where The members of the household regiments ride and march in review. The Queen often appears on horseback herself. And for those of you who've been tourists in London, especially you kids, this is maybe where you've come and you've seen one of the guards sitting on a horse and you've tried to talk to him and he didn't say anything to you, which is always frustrating for young visitors to London when they get nothing back from the guards outside any of the royal palaces here. But this is Horse Guards Parade as they go through the very same place where other funeral processions have formed up, not very far from the offices of the War Room, from which the late great Prime Minister Winston Churchill, the great British wartime leader, ran the affairs of the war from underground. This is a core bit of this national capital, which is rich, eminently rich in the nation's history. Barbara.
Peter, I'd like to follow up just a little bit when you were talking with Andrew Holden and Andrew Morton. You know, Princess Diana, when she did that interview now 2 years ago, said at the time that she didn't think that Prince Charles, she said in effect, she didn't think that he would really be the best king, that she hoped that her son implied that she hoped that Prince William would be king. Now there is a magazine article just out in New York that in which she supposedly, we will never know, had said that he shouldn't be king, Prince Charles, because he is a follower and not a leader. So to some degree, don't you think, Anthony, that she has put down his reputation, perhaps not meaning to, perhaps out of love for her son?
She's never, ever believed that Prince Charles will become king. She said, actually, for the...
Excuse me again for interrupting, but Her Majesty has left Buckingham Palace. Perhaps that applause you hear is for the sudden appearance of the national flag, the Union flag, or Union Jack as we most commonly know it, flying at half-staff over Buckingham Palace. This, in this country, and throughout the British Commonwealth certainly, will be taken as enormously significant. Sorry, Andrew, continue.
Yes, this has been a consistent theme of Diana's life over the last 10 years. She's never believed that Prince Charles will become king, and she's never believed that herself will become queen, albeit not in these circumstances. She's always seen the hope for the royal family as being Prince William, which is why she's invested so much of her own time and so much of her own emotional energy in Prince William, in taking him to see down and out, in taking him to see the homeless, in taking him to see AIDS patients. She wants him to have a rounded view of what life is really like inside Britain today, so that when he becomes king, as she always believed he would, and keep the standard raised of monarchy for the 21st century, then at least he will be in touch with the people. And that's what she always felt about the royal family. They're not in touch with their emotions, they're not in touch with the people.
In case you are just arising, as anywhere in the United States, thank you for joining us on ABC. We are here in London covering the funeral of Diana, the Princess of Wales, and we are not too very long from the actual funeral service itself in the 1,000-year-old Westminster Abbey. From around this city and around the country and around the world, royals and commoners, friends and officials of Diana, who was killed last Saturday, are gathering on the Abbey to celebrate her life. Coming through Horse Guards Parade, not terribly far now from Whitehall, which is not very far from Westminster Abbey itself, her coffin on a gun carriage, accompanied by members of the Welsh Guard and the King's Troop of the Household Cavalry, and accompanying her as she moves, her ex-husband, Prince Charles, her two sons, William and Harry, Earl Spencer, her brother, and the Queen's sister, I beg your pardon, the Queen's husband, the Duke of Edinburgh. Other members of the royal family and the Spencer family have already gathered in Westminster Abbey. The First Lady, Mrs. Clinton, I think, has arrived with the British ambassador, Admiral William Crowe. Various members of what is described by the Royal Palace here as Diana's celebrity friends are here. The news services are saying that Tom Hanks is here, Diana Ross, Tom Cruise and his wife, Nicole Kidman, and Steven Spielberg is said to be here as well. But much more important to this day than any of the individuals who are here is the vast display of public sentiment on the streets today, as it has been for the entire week, for this 36-year-old, astonishingly glamorous human being who was killed in, to use that dreadful cliche, the prime of her life. Her Majesty the Queen, who came out and stood outside the front gates of Buckingham Palace while the gun carriage passed, and then got in a car and came the short distance here to Westminster Abbey with the Queen Mother, that is to say Queen Elizabeth's mother, Queen Elizabeth, who's 97 years old, being led in where they'll be greeted by the Dean of Westminster and perhaps by the Archbishop of Canterbury, the leading figures of the Anglican Church, of which the Queen is the secular head in Britain. This abbey is, some of you undoubtedly have visited it, is eeks with history.
This, however, will be a service unlike any that's been held here before, where you have Elton John singing, where you have poetry that's going to be read by Princess Diana's two sisters. The Prime Minister will read, Prime Minister Blair will read from the Bible and speak of love. Princess Diana's favorite hymns will be played. There has never been a service like this. It's been called a unique service for a unique person, and it will be. So, you know, Peter, when you and I covered, as did many broadcasters, the wedding, one knew in advance what it was going to be. It was a traditional ceremony. This is unlike anything before.
Well, never before, Barbara, as you know, did we ever think we should be here 16 years ago when we sat on a we're on a tiny balcony overlooking Westminster Abbey today. 16 years ago, we sat on an even tinier balcony outside St. Paul's Cathedral in the city of London, and were in those days stunned by the joy and celebration of that day. A day much like this. The British have been lucky with their weather, if that's an apt way to put it today. But it has enabled a great many people to come. Scotland Yard tells us just a minute ago that 1 million people have been here on the streets today to watch the gun carriage go through. And again, if you're just joining us, this funeral procession has taken much longer than originally intended because it was felt by the Spencer family and by the royal family and certainly by the government that more people should have an opportunity to see Princess Diana one last time. When this ceremony is over, she'll travel almost 80 miles by car to the scene of her family home in the county of Northamptonshire, about 80 miles from here. But on this particular voyage through Hyde Park, past Buckingham Palace, through the historic Horse Guards Parade, and then down Whitehall towards the British Parliament, this has been the heart of empire for so long, and this young woman has done so much to change what was for so long its core establishment.
I was going to point out, sometimes it's difficult for you and me to hear each other if it sounds as if we're interrupting. I was just going to point out that royal business goes on as usual. This is the weekend that the Prime Minister of Great Britain goes and visits Balmoral to stay with the Queen. And when this service is over, he is indeed going to do that. So the certain traditions, certain things never change.
Just watch this very quietly for a moment and perhaps ask first Cynthia McFadden and then Aaron Brown to give us quietly their assessment of what the reaction has been of the people as we go along. Cynthia?
You know, Peter, here at the palace, it has been extraordinary what's happened in the last 15 or 20 minutes. When the cortege passed initially, it was absolutely still. People 20 deep, 30 deep in some places, almost 50 deep in other places, stood absolutely silently. There was a small group, a stream of people that has apparently followed the cortege the entire length and have been winding behind it. In some of the photographs, you've been able to see them. But I think perhaps there was polite applause when the Queen came out and watched the cortege pass. But the most extraordinary moment for me was when the standard was lowered and the Union Jack was raised. The applause was deafening and spontaneous, and people stood in place and stared at that flag for probably 5 or 10 minutes without moving. It has been a remarkable sight here this morning.
Thank you, Cynthia. I'll speculate that when we hear these smatterings of applause for such gestures, it is because we are seeing the royal family doing what the people have wanted them to do all week, which is to respond to the public need for the royal family to share this in the same manner in which so much of the public has shared. And it's been very difficult for members of some generations in Britain this week to comprehend what is going on. A member of the older generation was heard to say here earlier this week that his generation was, brought up and trained to fight Hitler, and that it was difficult to understand a generation when all it took was love to pick up on the great Beatles song and the Rock and Roll Princess. But over the several days since Diana was killed, even those people here and around the world who at first were stunned by the reaction and uncertain about the reaction have come to understand that what is being seen here has enormous meaning in many ways, about celebrity, about monarchy in the 20th and eve of the 21st century, and certainly about the press and about television. There are people here, as there are at home, who believe that our participation in this and the extent to which we have covered it has simply given it a renewed adrenaline at almost every minute. But in London today, this tradition of modern and traditional is inescapably real. Aaron Brown. Let us go to the front of the west door of Westminster Abbey now, because Diana's coffin has arrived, and here in the tight confines in the shadow of St. Margaret's Church, to the left of the Abbey there is absolute silence. Minutes after 11 on Saturday morning, on the balconies of the Grace and Favorite Apartments, the government buildings here, people stand absolutely silent, almost all of them in dark clothes, as the gun carriage draws very gently to a halt in front of the west door. Bearers from the Welsh Guards. She is the Princess of Wales. This regiment of foot guards raised in 1915 by the order of His Majesty King George V, so that Wales would be included in the national complement of the regiments of foot guards identified with the countries and the various counties of the United Kingdom. It was only 2 days after they were formed that they mounted a guard at Buckingham Palace, St. David's Day in Wales. And now these men who most recently have seen service in Northern Ireland and the Falklands and ceremonial duty in Hong Kong will carry this most beloved, controversial, talented and tortured princess into the great nave of Westminster Abbey. All are here. The Queen Mother, Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, Diana's family, her mother, her stepmother, her 2 sisters, her brother, her friends, from, it is fair to say, all walks of life, the royal and the common, the celebrated and the underprivileged. Those are the muffled bells of Westminster itself. Service will be conducted by the Very Reverend Wesley Carr, who is the Dean of Westminster. He's been the Dean only since last February. It's the biggest thing, he says, I have ever done. But it is, he points out, a rare opportunity for the Abbey to bring together the pageantry, the royal history, and the common touch. In the ceremony, we will not see members of the royal family or members of the Spencer family at their request. Just to repeat that members of the royal family will not be seen during this ceremony, and nor, I suspect, will members of the Spencer family, other than the manner in which they may participate in the service, namely Her Majesty and the Duke of Edinburgh there placing a wreath. And now the boys and Prince Charles placing a wreath. It is intended to be a service which would have pleased Diana, much discussed by her brother, her two sisters, and the royal family, and the government. Prime Minister will participate.
We are gathered here in Westminster Abbey.
The Dean of Westminster.
For the life of Diana, Princess of Wales, to commend her soul to Almighty God, and to seek his comfort for all who mourn. We particularly pray for God's restoring peace and loving presence with her children, the Princes William and Harry, and all her family. In her life, Diana profoundly influenced this nation and the world. Although a princess, she was someone for whom, from afar, we dared to feel affection, and by whom we were all intrigued. She kept company with kings and queens, with princes and presidents. But especially we remember her humane concerns and how she met individuals and made them feel significant. In her death, she commands the sympathy of millions. Whatever our beliefs and faith, let us with thanksgiving remember her life and enjoyment of it. Let us rededicate to God the work of those many charities that she supported. Let us commit ourselves anew to caring for others. And let us offer to him and for his service our own mortality and vulnerability.
Many of you may recognize this first hymn. It was sung at Diana's wedding to Prince Charles. I vow to thee, my country.